Welcome to the Strive, Seek, Find podcast with me, Tom Heaton. What is talent? Why do those that we see succeed in sporting, musical, or even professional domains seem to be of a different category to us? We don't tend to look at them and say, oh yes, that is basically me. We say, wow, they are so talented. They have such an amazing ability for whatever it is. And go on to either explicitly or implicitly shut ourselves away from that possibility. We write ourselves off. That could never be me. The problem is that this illusion starts to disintegrate upon any sort of inspection. When we examine the greats, whatever their field, we find very little innate specialness. If we're being more precise, we will look at the genetic and environmental factors that have contributed. There are some, to be sure, but they exert a very different influence from what we might assume. For instance, genetic factors display much more of a threshold effect than a continuum. That is, you only need to have genes that are good enough to succeed, rather than being the luckiest 1% or 0.1% of the genetic lottery. And this bar is low, very low in some cases. Yes, some very physical pursuits are more affected here. You want to be reasonably tall to make a living off basketball. But even here the relationship is much weaker than we first think. The magic of talent comes from elsewhere. So what about environmental factors then? The link here is admittedly stronger. Our environment plays a significant role on our trajectory. However, there is again a threshold effect in play. But here the threshold is one of initiation rather than limitation. That is, whilst in some scenarios it seems to be a higher threshold than the genetic one, once we start to gain adequate traction on it, we can make much more progress. So again, this seems a rather poor explanation of talent. What does that leave us? To me, that leaves our minds. Now this is a very broad term to me which captures our motivations, our behaviours, our habits, our learning, our mental models, many of which are also linked to genetics and our environment. But these are under our control to a degree. It is through these factors where we exert our influence. And most relevantly, it is these factors which hold the greatest explanation of talent and excellence. That is why, as Daniel Chambliss notes, talent is nothing other than a shorthand for a process. Talent is not an ingredient, but rather a mechanism. People with talent are actually better learners, had better habits, understood their goals and translated them to action better, and use these factors to manipulate the environment and, wherever possible, their genetic influence. It is this which seems to be one of the greatest misunderstandings of human excellence, in part because it makes human excellence actually rather dull. Even though it is certainly not always easy, many of the components are actually pretty simple. Indeed, we know about many of them already, which is itself in many ways a skill issue. The challenge is more about enacting them. As such, talent is really the sequence of skills that we learn and the journey that we would take with them. Talent attempts to describe the innate, whilst actually representing the modifiable. This is such a shame because it makes us feel like excellence is beyond us. It makes us believe that if we are missing those special ingredients to start with, we have no ability to obtain them. When in fact, we have the capacity to create these ingredients through our own actions. Not all of them maybe, but many, and probably all the important ones. Yes, we often need a degree of luck to develop these core skills, those catalyst skills. But if we can start a chain reaction. We can create a forwards momentum, and before we really know it, we have achieved far more than we ever thought we could. As such, we should look to abolish the term talent and replace it simply with the recognition of skill and knowledge. We should look at those greats that we so admire, and instead of attributing to them some hidden ability, be impressed by the skills that they have been able to harness, skills which are available to us too. Instead of being awed by them, be inspired. Thank you for listening. To keep up to date and to follow my writings, subscribe to me on Substack, which is striveseekfind.substack.com, or follow me on X at 2striveseekfind.